to try it. I think that'll make it easier to send to you, because then trying to email it, it's going to be too big of a file.
Yes. Well, folks, I just want to welcome everybody. We are on our Mentor Waco Coalition training series and looking under what's best for student success. And we have a series of videos that people can visit and see. We have a live Zoom call right now. We have a great session for today, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. But hopefully this video will be accessible to others in the coming months as they're looking at the relationship between mentors and mentees. And so we're happy to have Mary Zane Nelson here. She's the project director of the BEAR project, which stands for Be Emotionally Aware and Responsive, which is part of the Diane Garland School of Social Work. And so she's an overall great person, a good friend, and we're lucky she's here. She's going to share about trauma-informed care. And I really enjoy it because I think I'm a closet social worker. And so she's talking about these things that are like textbook things. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Yes, teach me more. So I'm excited to hear about this. Mary Zane, the floor is yours. I don't know if you're going to have question and answer, but you are in charge now. So thanks for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. I was really honored to be asked. I will have time at the end for question and answer, but if you have questions as we go, just please stop me or put it in the chat or whatever is easiest for you. Yeah, I am a social worker. I'm a licensed social worker. I'm working on my clinical license, and I've done predominantly school social work for most of my career. And so that's really where my experience is coming from in this. But what I'm going to share with you today is kind of one of the focuses of BEAR Project. And so we really look at trauma and how it affects the kiddos that we work with and how it changes the work that we do. So if you have questions, or I can send you resources afterwards, I'll put my info in the chat later on too, so you can find me. Let me share my screen with y'all and then we'll get started. I was telling Herman that this is my first time doing a PowerPoint on Zoom, so y'all just bear with me. We're learning about technology here. Okay, so this is called Stop, Look, and Listen, and we'll just get started. We're gonna take a look today at trauma in the brain and behavior, and then, why do we need to know that? And then how does trauma affect us, and some self-care aspects, especially when you're working with mentees that may take a little more energy or may take a little more of your emotional time or something like that. It's important to remember that we need to take care of ourselves too. So trauma can create a sense of fear or overwhelming. And so I want to read you this definition of trauma. I always read it. Someday I'm going to hope to memorize it, but I haven't gotten there yet. But the definition, this is from Bruce Perry, and he's a child psychiatrist who founded the Child Trauma Academy in Houston. And he says, an experience or a pattern of experiences that impairs the proper functioning of the person's stress response system, making it more reactive or sensitive. And so what I really want to emphasize there is that it overwhelms our capacity to function. And so if you think about maybe some of the, and I don't know what type of students or what type of kids that y'all are mentoring, but maybe if they've been referred because they're having some struggles in school or something like that, I wonder if you could think about some of the behaviors that they may be showing in school and how it might relate to a trauma, or as we go through, if you can just kind of be thinking of that. Okay, so let's take a closer look at trauma. So there's a lot of different types of trauma. There's system perpetuated poverty, which really does have an effect on the way that we live and the way that we, the way that we react to situations. Systemic racism could be one, incarceration of yourself or a parent, or community trauma. And that could be something like gang-related shooting, or it could even be a natural disaster. So we talk about Hurricane Harvey a lot, being a community trauma. And so, yeah, we just want to talk about too that research shows that high poverty and stress of living in poverty can cause trauma to the brain, which is interesting when you think about the demographics of Waco and the kiddos that are in public school and how many of them are living in poverty. Okay, so we also want to talk about how perception is everything with trauma. And so what may affect one person in a great way may not affect the next person in as strong of a way. So we think about like the loss of a pet. If your pet dies, that may be devastating for you. Whereas for someone else, it's like, yeah, that was sad, but it doesn't stop their life maybe as much as someone else. And so typically when we're in person, I take, and I have them here, I take this water bottle and this Sprite bottle, and then I have people list off different types of trauma. So it could be like the loss of a parent or a hurricane, and I'm shaking these at the same time. So every time you tell me about a trauma, I shake these bottles. And then when I'm in person, I'll ask the people like, okay, who wants to open the Sprite bottle after we've talked about all this? And it just goes to show that the same exact thing happened to both of these bottles and could happen to our students, but they react completely different ways. And so it's just a good mental picture that you have when you're thinking about like, this kid has been through the same exact thing as this kid and they're responding completely different. And so just remembering that perception is everything in that. Okay, sorry, I'm doing two different things. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to looking at trauma in the brain and how it affects the brain. And I have a little video for y'all to watch and I'm really hoping it works. So as I start this video, I want you, it's going to tell you this, but there are footballs going across the screen, and I want you to count how many footballs. Okay. Hope it's not going to play anything else.
That was evil.
That was evil. Why was it evil? It's tricky, right? Oh, hold on. Now it's not gonna let me keep. It's gonna play it for y'all again. Okay, so that is a great example of how a student who is in trauma or in crisis may want to do the right thing, or may want to hear what you're having to say, or may want to follow directions, that type of thing. But they can't see what's going on because the footballs are flying so fast within their brain, and there's so many things going on for them. They might be having thoughts of like, what's going to happen when I get home, or and that may not be as much with mentorship. It's more in schools, but even if something happens at school and or at home, and then they're worried about it while you are with them, or while you're spending time with them, or what's coming up next in class, or those type of things. So when we know that when a student is in trauma or crisis, they cannot hear, they cannot see, and they cannot focus because they're not operating in their full brain capacity. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. So the body's response to trauma can look a lot of different ways. It can look like anxiety, sleep disturbance, nightmares, anger, angry outbursts, reduced concentration, decline in productivity, irritability, loss of interest, sadness. All of those different things could be a result of trauma. Okay, there are some risk factors for a trauma response for a person, and those can start even, unfortunately, before a child is even born. It can be a difficult pregnancy or complicated delivery or birth, early hospitalization, natural disasters, or abuse and neglect. And I think that's kind of the one that we think of the most often, is abuse and neglect being the trauma. But I think it's important to point out, if the mom has a lot of is really struggling to make ends meet while she's pregnant and is working 2 jobs, is on her feet all the time. Even just the stress on her body can cause some trauma there. So trauma in the brain, I just think this is so interesting, is that Dan Siegel, who wrote The Whole Brain Child, he talks about your upstairs brain and your downstairs brain and how we process things from the bottom of our brain to the top of our brain. And so when we have situations in our life, like say I'm in my office and I hear a door slam down the hallway. At first, I might like jump a little, like, oh, that startled me. But because I have a pretty well-regulated brain, I can pretty quickly get to the top of my brain, or my prefrontal cortex, where all my reasoning, where all of my kind of higher level thinking happens, and say like, oh, it was just a door slamming. However, for someone who's had a lot of trauma or who is dysregulated within their brain, then when they hear that door slam, that may really throw them for a loop, and they might go into that fight, flight, or freeze response. And especially if they, you think about students in schools, and with all of the school shootings that we've had in recent years, there's a lot of fear sometimes for students, excuse me, around that. And so I just like this visual of your downstairs brain versus your upstairs brain. And your downstairs brain controls things like breathing, your survival instincts. And then your upstairs brain does thinking, body control, empathy, feeling, emotional regulation, that type of thing. And what we also know about the brain and trauma is that it changes the development of the brain. And so what you're seeing is a picture on the left of a healthy brain. And then on the right is a picture of a student, of a child that was abused and neglected. And what you're seeing is that the brain on the right is less active. You can see less red. The red is the most active part. And so the downstairs part of her brain is more active, and the upstairs, which is that front part, is less active. Whereas in the normal brain, you see how much red is in that front part of the brain. And so when we are in trauma or crisis a lot, we stay in our downstairs brain more, which actually causes that to overdevelop. Excuse me, y'all. And then the upstairs brain doesn't get as much development, versus a brain that is well regulated gets development on all the parts and is more equally developed. Does that make sense? Does anyone have questions about that? Okay, y'all just stop me. I can't see a lot of you. So one way we like to explain this to kids, because they don't really always understand all the technical terms about our brain and about the science behind it. And sometimes they just don't care either. It's like they just need a tool. And so we say that when you are in a fight, flight, or freeze response, then your lid is flipped. And so this is like a model of the brain, and this is your prefrontal cortex, is your fingers covering it. And when you have something that upsets you or that scares you or something like that, then your lid is flipped and it exposes your amygdala, which is the alarm center of the brain. And you're not able to really fully reason and be logical until you get that amygdala back covered up. And so we use that even with like 5-year-olds, of like, oh yeah, when you didn't get your way in PE and you had to go inside before you were ready, that made you really mad and your lid was flipped. And then you started acting like you normally don't act because you weren't thinking clearly. So we need to figure out ways that we can do deep breathing, or we need to figure out ways to help you get back to where you're like this, because we know that you think better when you're like this. And so you can use it all the way up. I mean, I use it with adults too, even in, I do some private practice therapy, and I use it with them to help them think through like, oh, what part of my brain am I using right now? And how do I get to the most efficient, most effective part of my brain to where I'm thinking the most clearly and making the best decisions for myself? The good news is that the brain is plastic, and so it can grow and change. And so even a brain that has been abused, neglected, that has lived in crisis and trauma for a long time, it's not hopeless. And I think sometimes that it feels that way. And it may take a long, long time to retrain that brain and help that person to get to a place where they're able to use that prefrontal cortex upstairs brain on a regular basis. But that I think it's just really important to remember that the brain is plastic. And I think this is one of the great things about mentorship is that you have a real opportunity to really establish some trusting relationships, establish healthy modeling of how to handle situations, and just being an outlet for students when they're in trauma or crisis or needing to process some of those things. One of the ways to do that is healing interactions. And so we need healthy, consistent interactions that help retrain the brain and build the upstairs brain. That's kind of what I just said. Healthy interactions help to heal by creating feelings of trust, self-worth, self-efficacy, self-regulation, and better mental health outcomes. And so, you know, we especially kiddos who have had a lot of trauma, often their self-worth is very, very low, and they know that they're not performing or behaving at the level that other students are able to. And so we need to establish that we find value in them and we find worth in them, no matter what their behavior, and that oftentimes it's not their fault. And so we need to help them see that about themselves, and through that, then they gain self-regulation and they start to trust. Okay, so a trauma-informed mindset, which is what we train all of our interns to do, and we try and train school staff and personnel to do as well. And I think a lot more of the education world is shifting to this anyway, but it shifts your mindset from what is wrong with you to what happened to you. And so when we look at a situation, when I go into a classroom where a child is melting down and it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, like you didn't get the snack you wanted. Well, when I'm thinking, what is wrong with you? My empathy isn't really there. I'm not feeling very gracious. I don't have a lot of patience. I'm like, get up off the floor. It's just not that big of a deal. But when I think about what happened to you, and maybe you didn't get a good breakfast that morning, and so you knew that that was the one thing that was going to make you feel full, or maybe you know that there's not food for dinner that night, and so you're trying to keep an extra snack for dinner that night, or anything. Or maybe it is just that you feel like you never get the snack you want and you feel real sad about that, and you know, people don't listen to you at home or something like that. So I think just shifting our mindset of what happened to you, what's going on here, more than what's wrong with you, really helps even keep us in our upstairs brain when we're dealing with a situation where a student or a mentee may not be functioning with all cylinders at that point. So, okay, so now we're going to talk about how to empower students and children so that they can start doing this on their own, because now that we understand how trauma can affect the brain and it can affect their behavior, then we can teach them and show them ways to see that in themselves and give them strategies that they can start recognizing those things in themselves. So one of the ways that we teach that is through what's called TBRI, or trust-based relational interventions. And this is a model that comes out of TCU in Fort Worth. It was created by a lady named Karen Purvis. And now TCU has the Karen Purvis Child Institute, where they do a lot of training around child development and that type of thing. But TBRI is a model for trauma-informed care. It's used by, it was created for adoptive and foster care families to do connection and correction through that system. Especially, they were seeing a lot of failed international adoptions and seeing that parents were not equipped to deal with the traumas that children came to the United States with when they had been maybe in orphanages where there just wasn't adequate care, or they had been in previously abusive situations, if they were coming through CPS or something like that. And so this is kind of a model that started as a one-on-one or one-on-two intervention, and then they've since opened that up to be full-scale classroom interventions. But they have 3 kind of principles. And there's week-long trainings on this. So I'm not by any means, I'm just scraping the surface with this today. But they talk about needing to have connection overall. And so when you are needing to correct a child, that you need to connect with them first. And so we say connection before correction. And I don't know how much you guys are having to correct your mentees or having to deal with even that kind of thing. But even I think about when I used to do mentoring, if it was like we were reading a book together and I needed the student to come back and sit down with me instead of running through the hallway or something like that, sometimes that can turn into something bigger than it would if it was just a kid who maybe hadn't had trauma in their past. And so we need to connect with them. And that can look like some playful engagement of like, oh man, I thought we were supposed to walk through the hallway. Let's try walking instead of running, and just really starting at that playful level, or even like some appropriate touch, or just a way to connect with them, and then making that correction in a gentle and kind way. And that empowers them to then be able to start correcting themselves and learning what healthy connection looks like. So this part of going a little bit deeper, these empowering principles are that students or children need a safe environment and they need felt safety. So this is kind of a different concept for some people, is that I can tell my 5-year-old, at night when it's dark in his room, hey, you're safe. There's nothing in here that's going to get you. There's no monsters there. Like, the doors are locked. Daddy and I will keep you safe. But if he doesn't feel safe, it doesn't matter how many times I say that, he doesn't feel it. And so we need to figure out what makes the child feel safe and figure out ways that we can implement that into their surroundings. And so, that might, like for that example with my 5-year-old, it's like, here's your night light, and we can turn it on as bright as you need it to be so that you feel safe. You can see that there's no one in this room, type thing. Rituals. So that might be every time you go to pick up the child for your outing or for your time with them, that you have a special handshake you do, or that you have a greeting, or you guys sing a song together, or you always go. I work with the LEAD program through the chamber, and I know like they do tours of different businesses around town, and then they usually do lunch or something. So maybe it's like we always go to this one spot and we get milkshakes after the tour or something like that. I'm not saying it has to be food related. I'm just saying like something that is just y'all, and it gives y'all a sense of connection. Meeting physical needs. So this is a big one we see in schools a lot. And this is something that I would encourage all parents, all people who are working with other people to know about. And so when we're having someone that might be kind of not acting themselves, or, especially with mentees, if they're acting off or if some behavior feels dysregulated, check these physical needs first. When's the last time they ate? Have they had water? Have they been able to move as much as they need to, or have they had to move too much? Sensory issues. So again, if we are in person, usually when I do these trainings, I bring a whole bucket. You can see it back there on my wall, a whole bucket of fidgets. And so we have Theraputty, we have pipe cleaners, we have these clickers, everything you can imagine, so that even within our trainings, we want you to feel comfortable and get your sensory needs met. So if you need to be fidgeting with something, if you need to stand in the back, if you need to jump up and down, if you need to go to the bathroom, if you need to whatever, we want you to meet your needs. And that, again, models for students or mentees, hey, I'm meeting my needs. I want you to meet your needs too. I'm going to help you meet your needs. So I'm going to check in with these things. And then last thing is sleep and rest. That's a little bit harder to do in the mentee situation or even at the school level. But even if it's like, hey, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. Why don't you lay your head down on the desk? Or I'm going to give you 10 minutes. We're just going to sit here and we're going to take 10 deep breaths together. And then we're just going to rest for a few minutes, something like that, to kind of do a quick recharge. And then another empowering thing is healthy transitions. And so a lot of kiddos who have been in trauma haven't been given a lot of warning that things are going to change in their life. So if you think about someone who's been involved with CPS, or even who has a parent who's incarcerated, they probably didn't get a lot of warning that mom or dad was not going to be there when they got home from school. Or even a divorce, there's often not a lot of kind of heads up about a divorce situation. Or even I think about immigrant families. If a family member gets deported, they don't get time to transition and say goodbye usually. Or even, in the school setting, even if they know the class ends at 12:45, but nobody warns them and they can't tell time, then that might feel really abrupt. And so one of the things we really do is seek to give a lot of warning and a lot of heads up about transitions. And so that could look like, as soon as you pick up your mentee, I'm so excited to hang out with you today. I can't wait to go do A, B, and C. And that's going to take about an hour. And then I'm going to take you back to class. And I'll give you a heads up halfway through, and I'll give you a heads up about 10 minutes before we go back, and then 1 minute before we go back. And it may not need to be that much. It depends on your kiddo. But then, and it's being consistent and honoring that. And so, sometimes you forget. So I like to set reminders even in my phone, and then I don't have to think about it. But then the reminder goes off and I'm like, oh, that's a good reminder. We have 30 minutes left. And so, if there's certain things you want to get done in those 30 minutes, we need to start doing those now. Hey, we have 10 minutes left, and I really want you to be able to finish this project. So, let's figure out what we can do today, or something like that. And so anyway, that's just, I think, again, I don't even think that's just a trauma thing. I think most of us really like to have warning of what's coming next, and we like to know what's going to happen. And so if we can get in the habit of just saying and normalizing that for people, it just makes it a lot easier on you and everyone else too, because then they go back into their class more regulated, or they go back home more regulated. They're not thrown a fit or really upset because they felt like you got cut off abruptly with them. Okay, so trauma and us. Now we're going to move to, how does trauma affect us? Specifically a little bit when it's not our own trauma. So we call that secondary traumatic stress. And this may not affect mentors as much, but it could, because I know that you guys care a lot about the people that you're mentoring. And sometimes when you see them in situations that are really hard to watch, that can really affect you. And so I think this is something that's so important to talk about. I'm going to put up now some warning signs of what we call vicarious trauma. And so it's important for y'all to look at these and see, to know these in your brain, kind of like, oh, maybe I am starting to experience some vicarious trauma. Maybe I'm getting a little unhealthy in this area, because you do care so much about the kiddos that you're mentoring. And so that can look like hypervigilance, poor boundaries. And I know that is something that with mentoring can be so hard anyway. Boundaries are so hard when the kids are saying, I just want to see you every day, and I want to, can we do this all the time? And it's like, I would love to do that all the time. I'd love to see you every day, but that's just not possible. And so if you start to see that happening more and more, it's just something to be aware of. Avoidance, numbing to, or the inability to empathize. If you're getting chronic exhaustion or feelings of inadequacy around it. I think often we do feel inadequate with mentoring. We just don't have enough time, and maybe aren't always as equipped as we would like to be to work with the mentees that we have. But just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind of like, if you're having a lot of these symptoms, we need to take a step back and figure out some more supports for you and some healthier outlets that you can get so that you're more able to pour out to that mentee. So one of the ways to do that is to have a self-care plan. And so I think self-care is kind of this big buzzword right now. It's this trendy thing that we've kind of taken hold of, especially within the pandemic. And I'm thankful it's somewhat trendy, because I think it's important that we all pay attention to it, whether we're mentoring or whether we're in stressful situations or what, I think we all need to be doing a good job of taking care of ourselves. But I also think sometimes when it becomes trendy, then it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing self-care. It's fine. I'm like, I take a bath once in a while or something like that. And we don't take it as seriously as we maybe should. And so it's important to think about there's several categories of self-care: physical, relational, emotional, spiritual, and professional. And so I would just encourage you to take a minute, maybe even after we're done today, and look at those 5 categories and kind of either write down the things that you are doing in each of those categories to take care of yourself. Or if there's like a category that you're like, man, I've never thought of taking care of myself in that area, think of some things that you might be able to start doing that would up your self-care in that area a little bit. And I'm not talking like you don't have to do a day at the spa. You don't have to have these big elaborate plans, but like one of my physical self-care things is that I put myself to bed at 10 o'clock every night. Whether or not like I feel like I need it, that's one of my self-care things is I turn off all of the other things and I'm in bed. I'm unreachable. I might not go to sleep, but I'm unreachable at 10 o'clock at night or whatever. Relationally, I know that I pour out a lot in my job, and when I do counseling, that's a lot of intake and a lot of words to absorb and a lot of things. And so when I get home, I have a deal with my husband that if I've been counseling all day, I get 30 minutes to go in our room, and the kids aren't allowed to bother me, and they're not allowed to come in for that 30 minutes. No one can ask me questions. No one can, like touch my body in any way. I have 2 small children, so that happens a lot. So I think those type of things, that relational boundary of I love my family, but I'm going to be a much better mom and wife if I get that 30 minutes to decompress and do some mindfulness or just do some zoning out or whatever it is. Sometimes it is like scrolling Facebook. That just helps me zone out and kind of transition into the role for home. Emotional, even just thinking about what am I sharing with people and what do I want to keep private, or do I need to find more outlets to share emotions happening inside of me, especially if you're having a really tough time. Maybe what your mentee is going through is really, really emotional, or maybe you have a personal thing that's really, really emotional that might be affecting or kind of overflowing into other parts of your life. Maybe it does look like some counseling, or maybe it just looks like, hey, I'm going to call this friend and I'm just going to say, I need 10 minutes just to vent and please just listen, or, those type of things. Spiritual, whatever your spiritual practice is, are you getting enough of it? And I know it's harder right now with some of the churches and things only meeting virtually, but what are some ways that you can get that spiritual piece of you met and fulfilled, whether it's journaling or meditation or worship or praying or some other practice that is life-giving and renewing for you. And then professionally, I think, and I think that goes back to some boundaries too, but even if it's like, my job feels really tough right now, and so I'm going to take an hour on Friday morning where I'm just gonna, maybe not an hour, whatever time you can, like I'm gonna go to this coworker's office and I'm just gonna ask how their family is. So I'm still in my professional setting, but I'm getting a little bit of, connection or something like that. Or I'm gonna take an hour off, or I'm gonna take a long lunch or something like that. Or, hey, I really don't feel like I'm growing lately professionally. I'm gonna find a conference to attend online and see if I can, connect with other people doing the same thing I'm doing, and that will energize me to feel like, oh, I can keep going type thing. Maybe with mentorship, it's like I find another mentor. It's not necessarily professional, but within this realm, maybe you find another mentor where you guys can talk once a month or something like that and just talk about how it's going. And that feels fulfilling, and it feels like a place to say, yeah, it's hard, but we love it and we can keep going type thing. So those are some ideas. I would really, really, really encourage you to think about your self-care and where is it lacking and where is it, maybe you're doing a great job, and then you should share with all the rest of us exactly what you're doing so we can get on that bandwagon too. Okay, so I just like this graphic. You can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself first. And so, especially when we're mentoring someone, we are pouring out a lot. We're giving time, we're giving emotional self and all of that. And it can really take a lot out of you. Even if it's good, even if it's a really good relationship, you might just really be thinking about that person a lot. Maybe they're applying for colleges and you're thinking, just about their future, and you feel really invested in that. And that's great. But that may take a lot of emotional toll on you, or maybe their family's going through something really hard and that weighs on you. And so I just think it's not just trendy, it is needed. So just remember that in this graphic. And again, when we're in person, we give everyone like a little jar that's filled with popcorn that we say like, we're filling it this time, but now it's your job once this is empty to figure out how you're going to fill this cup again. And so if you need a jar of popcorn, just give me your address and I'll drop one off to you so you can remember. Okay, so that is kind of the end unless y'all have questions. And I have a resource list on the last slide, so I'll put that up. But do y'all have any questions or comments or anything that was unclear?
I just wanted to know, what do you like to do for self-care? Like, what do you think is your most important thing to do?
That's a good question. I will say I think it changes different seasons. I have been doing a lot more reading for fun. So just like not trash novels, but just really easy, like silly books that kind of help me just get away a little bit. Typically, we really like to travel. That's not been a thing we can do lately. And then recently, my husband and I started running together. And so that has been really a good way to kind of get some of that stressful energy out of my body. And then, gosh, I mean, also, I'm a big advocate for therapy. I'm in therapy, and that feels like I would pay a lot of money to make sure I could keep going. I just feel like that is something we've really made a priority in our house, is that even if thankfully with insurance, it's not super expensive, but I think that's a really big thing for me right now, especially just, we're dealing with hard stuff. There's a lot going on in our world. And then coffee. I drink a lot of coffee. So that's not maybe the best physical self-care, but it does feel calming, and it feels, there's something about holding a warm cup of something, just doing that. So yeah. What about you? What are some of your self-care things?
I like to run as well. And yeah, I like running.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Other questions?
I'm finally on here, but
Hi,
good to see you.
you.
Kind of similar to the last question, but and probably a little too close to home for me. But how do you balance, like when you have people that say they don't have time, which I might be one of those, and work that is very focused on always going above and beyond, and like focusing, hey, you're salaried, so like you have to put in extra work, like having that and self-care?
That's a good question. Well, I think part of that is just, this might be a little too close to home for you too, but how much do you value yourself? And how much do you, and I know that sometimes we can't tell our bosses no, but sometimes I think it's because we've trained them that we can't tell them no. And so starting to set little boundaries, which I maybe didn't respect when you tried to do that earlier this year. But like even one thing I have seen be successful is making a list of all of the activities that you are doing on a daily basis, and even doing like a time log, here's what I've done for a couple weeks, and here are all of the hours. And then when you go to your boss or go to somebody within your organization and say, this is the time I'm putting in. I can't keep up at this level, and I'm not being my most productive because I'm not able to recharge. I don't know, a lot more businesses and organizations are putting in wellness time to the work week. Is that something that y'all have? Probably not. No. Okay. So maybe even trying to negotiate that of, here, I can show you past month, I've worked 50 hours this week, 55 hours, 45 hours. I would like to negotiate 1 hour, and it can be, you know, around your lunchtime, that I have off, that I get an extra hour where I'm not dutied anywhere, where I would like to go, you know, drive through Cameron Park for however long or whatever it is that you want to do. I mean, or, you know, maybe it's like, hey, once a month, I'm going to schedule an extra day off that I don't have to take time off for because I'm putting in all this time, or something like that. And you have to decide for you how much and how often it needs to be to where you feel like you're not running on a 20% battery all the time. But, you know, I mean, one of the things, for example, and I know that I work in a completely different setting than you, but one of the things that I do is like, well, so on the day that I go to therapy twice a month. And so on that day, I schedule it at 2:00 in the afternoon. I'm done at 4. So I just take that extra hour. And even if it's paid time off, I take those 2 hours, and that's like agreed upon by my boss, you know, all those things. And maybe it is easier because I can say I'm going to therapy, and so it feels a little bit more, but maybe your therapy is going for a run, you know, like maybe you say, this is my therapy or something like that. So I think too, and I don't mean that in a mean way, but I think if you value yourself and you value that you are wanting to continue to do this work for whatever amount of time you want to, then the way to be your best self in that work is to take care of yourself. I don't know if that helps you at all.
Yep. Yeah, no. And I don't want to go like too much into like a special tangent that's not relevant to everybody else. But one thing I'm mindful of, I usually try to say with these, this series, is I'm very hopeful that people watch this later as part of our webinar series since we're recording it. And one of the big things that I've thought a lot as the chair of the Mentor Waco Coalition is our teachers, because even though they're not explicitly mentors, like
Absolutely.
they have relationships with students that could be viewed as like a mentoring relationship. And I think they have an even more difficult situation. You know, there's not a lot of flexibility for teachers of like, hey, I'm just going to hop off campus for 30 minutes. It's like, no, you need a sub, like you can't do that, or, you know, whatever that might be. And so figuring out what that looks like when they just feel overburdened. And I don't know if you have any specific comments for that scenario where you truly, you know, are in a situation where you can't just step away.
Yeah, I think so. I have a couple different ideas or thoughts. And I think in pandemic time, I don't have a great answer for that. I would encourage, we call them micro breaks. So maybe if it is even like, you know, they find a practice that's like, there's all kind of apps now that are like the calming app or mindfulness or something like that. There's something, I don't think it's an app, but it's a website called the Mindful Minute. And they, and if that's not right, let me know and I can find it for you. But they're 1 minute or like 2 minute things where it's either like, think about these things, you know, type thing that kind of gets you away, but you don't have to go anywhere type thing. You don't have to do anything. And for some people that's really effective. For some, it's not as effective. You know, we all are going to have different things that work better or worse for us. When we've had adoptive school partners or volunteers in the past, sometimes what we've been able to do is say like, could you just step into this class for a little bit or not that you have time for this, Travis, but maybe if there was a way that like, you know, once a month an aide could take over the class for like the conference period. They have the conference period plus 30 minutes of the next class or something like that. So they can go off campus for lunch, or so that they can do something like that. If there is a way that, or even, I mean, I know everyone on a school campus is busy, but I find that it means so much to teachers. Like if the principal or if the assistant principals come and say, hey, I'm going to take your class for this period so you can go, even if it's just planning for, you know, so they don't have to use their home time to plan for their lessons or something like that. Things like that. If you're able to do that, I, again, know that everyone is so busy. And I know y'all have a huge campus, and so that's harder. One thing I've always encouraged interns or even student teacher interns is like, you do have a little bit more flexibility. If you're running to Sonic, offer to the teachers around you, hey, can I grab you a Sonic drink? Especially if it's happy hour. You know, it does cost money. And if you're able to do that, then do it. Or even, you know, if you can get the PTA to donate like a Sonic gift card, so you could run and pick up Sonic drinks for everybody, like donuts. And I know food doesn't always make things better, but it sure does say you care, you know? And so, and like a Sonic drink can really solve a lot of problems. I'm just saying, especially with our ice, you know, it's magic. So that might be something you could do. And then I think one thing that I felt was really effective, I was at Rappaport Academy, so much smaller and a much different situation. I'm very aware, but like, just asking the teachers, like, how are you doing? What would fill your cup? What would help you feel like, is it, you know, that, would it be getting your classes covered? Or would it be like, hey, I'm going to come work with this one student on this activity because I know he's really struggling and that's causing you so much worry because you really care about that student. And so I'm going to really work with him on that subject and do some extra stuff. And hopefully that makes your class easier type thing. You know, because that would be something that I would never think of, but they probably know exactly who in their class, or like even, I don't, you know, yeah, I think like a off-campus lunch can do a lot for a teacher if there is a way, but it's so, I mean, pandemic is so ridiculous. So I don't have a good answer for that. But I also like, and I'm not expecting you to do this, but handwritten thank you notes. I think that goes a long way for a lot of people. And I think you know the people in your school, so they're all going to receive that admiration differently. But I do think being noticed and appreciated goes a long way in whatever way you can. And even if that's like, I noticed that you were extra patient with so-and-so, and I know that it can be so frustrating when he continues to act out. And I'm just really thankful you're here, and I'm thankful he has you in his life type thing. That can mean a lot to some, and others are like, yeah, I just need him to start acting right. You know, so it is different depending on the person. But, you know, you can encourage your interns to help you with that too. So snacks, I always think snacks are good. Yeah, I don't know. Does that help you at all?
It does. And you didn't have to respond just about like Indian Spring as a specific,
Sorry.
you know, I was trying to put on more my Mentor Waco Coalition hat for that.
Yeah, no, that's for teachers. I think it is really hard because they are so tied to the school and they don't have that flexibility. So I think, and I don't know what all schools the mentors are at. But I wonder too, if even if you have a kid in a specific teacher's class, if there was a way for the mentor to connect and like, what are ways I can support you if that's like something they're able to do, you know? I don't know that probably taking over the class is not an option, but maybe if it's like, hey, I really need 5 dry erase markers that are random colors, you know, and they could pick that up or something like that. And I do think we should provide wellness time for teachers. I just don't know how we do it.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing, is allocating the time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, though.
Yeah, anytime. Okay, let me put up my, oh, nope, just kidding. It's not letting me. So there's my contact info if anyone needs it. And Travis, can we email it out if people, here, I can put it in the chat too.
There's a lot of different ways to do that.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
put it
you
in the chat once I can get out of this. And then just because I like to give credit where credit's due, here are the references. Because I don't like to, I did not come up with this stuff on my own, y'all. That's for sure. So.
All right, Herman, are you on here still? Did you have anything?
No, he had to,
Okay.
he had to step away. He said, so I am going to send him the recording.
Okay.
He said he had another meeting. I'm just going to put my stuff in the chat and then I'm done. So you take back over. Oops.
All righty. Does anybody else have any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for being on this session. Again, this is the Student Success Series. This is the last one of our webinar series. And just thank you for being here. We'll be getting these videos hopefully out soon, and just appreciate everybody being on here. And thank you so much, Mary Zane, for leading the session.
You. Of course, y'all have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.